There is a lot of help out there, and if somebody says your child did this, don't deny it.
These kids do require mental health care. They just don't require starting in the emergency room.
You don't forget being raped, sexually assaulted, sodomized as a child. You just don't forget that.
I was in a sandbox, and he called me out of the sandbox and brought me up into the bathroom.
I remember some kids had said out loud that they were abused by a rabbi, and they were thrown out of school.
Do you favor the perpetrators and keep those statute of limitations so they're hidden? Or do you favor the children?
These kids feel isolated, they feel alone, they feel that nobody listens, that nobody cares.
The consequences of ignoring or undertreating mental health problems and behavioral disorders in our children are huge. We see it every day in the news. It can take many forms, from suicidal behavior to academic failure, substance abuse, and aggression. I'm Diana Williams, and in the next half hour, we learn how schools are forced to turn to police or EMS when coping with the needs of children who may not have had access to care. How many who suffered the trauma of abuse are denied a chance at justice because of the statute of limitations, and how early intervention can make a huge difference. These are not easy stories to tell, and we warn you about the graphic detail ahead. We begin with a family on Staten Island that is coping with a runaway child. Andrew Parker took off in November of last year.
He was 16 years old when he ran away from home. Andrew is a very funny, lovable, good-looking 16-year-old boy. Obviously, I love him with all my heart. I adopted him when he was an infant.
Andrew's troubles started when he was just 12 years old.
He was diagnosed as ADHD and oppositional defiance disorder. You say left, they say right. You need to come home at a certain time. Well, it's only a half an hour late. He's special. He's an angel. Sometimes his halo is a little bit crooked, but he's a good boy.
Every child, of course, can be oppositional defiant at times. It's part of the job definition for being a kid. So what we're really talking about is kids whose behavior is so frequent and so extreme, it really has negative consequence for others emotionally and sometimes physically.
Experts say that 20% of adolescents have a diagnosable mental illness.
Among the runaway population, that number is probably triple that. Kids who are impacted by depression or a conduct disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. This is one of the reasons why these kids run to begin with. And moms and dads simply don't know what to do.
I tried very hard to give him structure. That didn't work. He was prescribed medicines to take, and then he was non-compliant. It's a lose the battle, win the war. So that's how I try to live my life with him. Andrew had several friends that I feel pulled him to the route that he shouldn't have gone to. Drinking, smoking pot, drugs. You don't have to listen to your mom.
For these young people who do run away, who have these mental health issues, I would imagine life on the street, they are more susceptible to being victimized.
Absolutely. They are at high risk anyway. If you're a kid on the streets of an American city, job one is to figure out how to survive. So there is a higher incidence of these kids falling prey to other kinds of victimization.
I'm afraid that he's being used in prostitution, in trying to sell drugs. I mean, he's been away from home. It's 5 months now. I don't know how he could survive without any type of money.
I've heard that where he is and if he's gonna get hurt.
Ironically, both the boys adopted by this now single mom have mental health issues. James has been in a residential program for a year and a half at Green Chimneys, a program known for its animal-assisted therapy.
If you want to describe our children best, you can say that they're emotionally fragile. They have behavioral difficulties, emotional difficulties, and most of them have learning difficulties on top of that.
James is diagnosed with pervasive developmental disorder and bipolar disorder, which means that James struggles with social interactions. He needs a lot of help in having appropriate relationships, and he struggles to regulate his mood, which means he needs help with his anger and anxiety.
He could be violent at times, and it was difficult dealing with him.
For a child like James, He really does well with more concrete, hands-on activities, so traditional talk therapy doesn't really work.
1, 2, 3, trot!
He loves working with the animals, he's caring, he's empathetic, so we're hoping to take some of those skills we see here up at the farm and translate that into his relationships with people.
How are we slow right now?
Oh, nice. Excellent. Nice job, buddy. He's doing really well.
Many of the animals that we have here have been rescued. The children know that and see a lot of themselves in the animals. They get to help heal the animal as they heal themselves.
Zipper came here approximately 2 years ago. She had a broken tail and she was minus a tooth. So our sense was whoever had her before probably was pretty rough and ready with her.
I think the beauty of when you pair a child, especially a child with special needs, with an animal is that the animals don't judge. They don't have these sort of preconceived notions that maybe other people do. And for these children, you know, with very fragile egos, it's really important for them to feel safe and to have confidence. Nice job, James, that was awesome. Great job.
We'll be right back with the effect budget cuts are having in schools. It's led to an increase in calls to EMS when a child is in crisis. We also have suggestions for parents on getting help and why the Parker family is hopeful they will see Andrew again.
This special presentation of Protect Our Children, Unlocking the Mind is sponsored by Tri-State Ford Dealers.
Studies show that there is only one licensed clinic treatment slot in New York City for every 3 to 4 children and teens with a mental health problem. Nationally and in New York City, we are greatly under capacity. The New York Times recently reported that many troubled children today are being handled by EMS because there simply aren't enough mental health professionals in the school system to handle them.
EMS is typically the way the children are sent to the psych emergency room from the schools. The ambulance is the safest way to get them there. If we're talking about referrals to psychiatric emergency rooms, that's happening for one of two reasons. Either a child or a teen has expressed a threat to either himself, herself, or to someone else, or they have engaged in really violently aggressive behavior.
Is there that help and support out there for families who are dealing with children who have mental health issues?
Well, Diana, it's a patchwork, and one of the challenges we face today is that as state and local budgets have gotten tighter and tighter, those are the kinds of resources that have tended to be cut first.
We are really grossly under capacity. In New York State, we had, for example, approximately a 10% cut this year in numbers of schools that had on-site mental health services.
This at a time when 868 children in a recent year threatened to commit suicide.
That's probably an underestimate. That's a number coming from the Department of Education. It doesn't count the number of kids who were referred for threat to somebody else.
Meanwhile, taxpayers are footing this bill.
It is hugely more expensive. Just the EMS or ambulance costs alone. If there is any kind of safety or difficulty issue, NYPD is also called. You're talking certainly upwards of $1,000 or more per ER visit. The other problem with it is that it is very traumatizing to children, to teens, and to family members. And as a consequence, it's not often the most effective way to get kids introduced into mental health care. They need a same-day mental health evaluation by somebody who's competent to do that. About 2/3 of schools in New York City still don't have this. They are trying to do the very best they can by these kids. They typically have no other recourse but to call EMS.
Caught in between are the parents. Both the Parker children were in public schools, and Suzanne had her hands full. Luckily, she is always open to expert advice.
I have 2 special needs children. I need to speak to James one way so that he understands it, and I have to speak to Andrew another way so that I can get through to him. Am I successful all the time? Absolutely not. Do I have patience all the time? Absolutely not. But you have to learn how to change to adapt to them because they don't know that they're different.
Part of working with parents and kids where oppositional behavior is such a problem is to help them find consequences, and not just negative ones, but especially positive rewards that really matter to a child and will motivate different behavior.
If I would take Andrew's phone away from him as a consequence, he would then take James's phone. And then James would find out about it, and he would get violent.
Our advice to parents in these cases is, don't respond to anger with anger. Be calm. Try to work through this.
You also have to remember that you're not going crazy. These things are happening to you, and you're not alone. You're not going to change it by being down on yourself. That's the way it is, and you have to move on, and it's not your fault.
When parents are struggling with their children and they feel that they need services from the school, the first thing I would tell them is they have to be good advocates for their children. They can always ask for an evaluation.
They should be speaking to the school social worker or the school psychologist or the guidance counselor because those staff are trained to help you find services off-site if they don't have something on-site. That's number one. Another place to go is go to your primary care provider, go to your pediatrician. If you know that your child has that kind of problem, seek out help. Educate yourself about what help is available.
As to Andrew, he's still missing, but the family has reason to be hopeful.
He left 2 consecutive voicemail messages on my cell phone saying, "Hi, Mom, it's Andrew. I'm fine. I love you."
And on Suzanne's birthday, she got an email from him.
My brother sent me a message on March 16th, the day before my birthday. It said, "Happy birthday, James. I know it's a day late, but it said, be good for Mom and give peanuts, hugs, and kisses for me."
It's the fact that he is continuing to communicate indicates that there is some love. This is a young man who is dealing with some demons of his own, and our concern is he's at risk.
His bike is in the shed waiting for him to come home. Andrew, I love you. I want you to come home. I want to hear your voice. I want to see that smile. That is the most beautiful smile in the entire universe. I just want you home.
If Andrew is watching, Suzanne wants him to know that his cousin Jacqueline is pregnant, and she hopes this news will bring him home. We'll be back with what the statute of limitations is doing to survivors of child sexual abuse who finally have the courage to speak. For more information, visit us at 7online/protect. Not many people know that there is a statute of limitations on child abuse charges. We found 2 sisters who finally, as adults, had the courage to confront their alleged abuser, only to discover it was too late to seek justice.
It started when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and it ended when I was about 14 or 15. And my abuser was my oldest brother. He would come into my bedroom.
Same for me. I was 6 until 12, so grade school through middle school, until right before I started high school.
Both sisters now say they knew the other was being victimized.
I was also told, if you tell anyone, I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to hurt family members.
Years later, the silence began to fall apart.
I was pretty much having a nervous breakdown at that point. I mean, my husband now, my boyfriend at the time, was like, "You need to go home and talk to your parents."
My instinct immediately was,
protect the family.
Quiet,
Yeah,
don't.
protect the family again.
Mom's in the other room, don't. Quiet. That panic about, shame, embarrassment, hurting family members, certainly it devastated my parents. When our older sister confronted him on our behalf, and she told us that he minimized it, that it was really just like playing doctor, and I was outraged, outraged, because it was not that. I was awakened in the middle of the night, which is why I had so many sleep issues later on.
People can sugarcoat child abuse any way they want. It's rape. That's what it is.
The fact that it took the sisters so long to talk, even amongst themselves, is no surprise.
It's not unusual for people to take quite a while, sometimes decades. I've had people come to me in their 60s and 70s who had never talked about it before.
The first time I told someone I was about 21 or 22, it was to my best friend. I'm 51 years old, and I've been having this nightmare since I was around 10. And the nightmare goes like this. I tell my mother about the sexual abuse, and instantly my house is in flames. When the harm is happening in your home by someone you're supposed to trust, there's really no safe place to be. Your voice comes out in layers. You know, you speak about it one time, you sort of clam up, and then you speak about it again. So it's a process of finding your voice as a victim.
What many victims of child sexual abuse don't realize is the clock is ticking. In many states, if you don't act, you are stripped of your day in court by the statute of limitations.
New York is one of the worst states in the country. The statutes of limitations block victims from going to court by the time they're 23 years old.
A tough deadline, given what victims are often going through at the time.
Especially the ones who are victimized in the family. They depend on the family. Coming forward before they're fully an adult is virtually impossible.
It's insane to think that in the midst of your shame, embarrassment, whatever, to think, oh, well, I've got 6 months, I better, file a claim.
You're worried
or
about not
report him.
jumping off a bridge, not going to court.
I've been working on this piece of legislation for about 7 years. The most important aspect of this legislation is the 1-year window. The 1-year window will allow victims of sexual abuse, no matter how long ago, to bring a civil suit against the person or the institution that is responsible.
Hawaii just passed legislation with a window of 2 years. Marcy Hamilton testified 12 times supporting this right to demand justice, which is still denied in states like New York.
You can't criminally prosecute them. You may not civilly sue them. And the reason, it's not because you don't have a case. It's not because you're not telling the truth. It's just a deadline.
The laws definitely do not favor the victims.
They can be sued by the perpetrator for defamation or for libel. And so unless you open up these statutes of limitations, we are protecting the perpetrators and we're not protecting our kids.
The resistance against the legislation comes from the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Jewish community, in some cases local school boards, the Scouts.
The Catholic bishops are halting legislation right now in 5 states.
The rationale for these statutes is that memories can be distorted over time.
Victims don't forget. I certainly haven't forgotten. You don't forget being raped, sexually assaulted, sodomized as a child. You just don't forget that. And every time we can't open the courtroom door, the voice of another child is muffled.
I think that it's a very simple question. Why should anybody who hurts a child get away with it?
They did file a lawsuit alleging abuse, but it was dismissed on procedural grounds, not on the merits.
We never had our day in court.
Perpetrators, they don't have just one victim. It's still continuing. If they're not held accountable, it's still continuing.
Perpetrators, on average, if you consult FBI statistics, will have about 100 victims in the course of their lives. The people who know the statute of limitations are the abusers.
If there's no statute of limitations on murder when the victim is dead, and this technically, in my opinion, is murder of the soul, why should those courtroom doors be closed on victims?
We'll be back with a young man who challenged his alleged abuser before he turned 23, but he says he was duped by the school and the members of his own Hasidic community. Stay with us.
This special presentation of Protect Our Children, Unlocking the Mind is sponsored by Tri-State Ford Dealers.
Joel Engelman's life changed forever when he and his parents went to the principal's office to complain about an older student at his yeshiva who was molesting him. He thought the principal in his strict Hasidic community would protect him, but it didn't happen that way.
I was 8 years old, the youngest of 7. A short while after, I started being called to the principal's office, where he would sexually abuse me, usually on I would say on an average twice a weekly basis for about 2 months.
This had to be very confusing for you.
Yes. The things he was telling me to do, which I knew were wrong, and only a day before he was screaming about the kids shouldn't put your hands in certain places and your body is dirty, and here he was touching me.
You told your parents?
He always made me promise him that I wouldn't tell my parents.
He was an authority figure for you.
Yes, absolutely.
By far, the great majority of perpetrators of sexual abuse are known to the child and known to the family. It can be a coach, it can be a scout leader, it can be a priest.
At the Brooklyn Child Advocacy Center alone, we see more than 2,000 cases of child physical and sexual abuse a year.
Parents often do not recognize the signs of abuse.
They were having difficulty in school, they were more argumentative, they were having difficulty going to sleep, or even things like bedwetting and difficulty with anger and depression.
If a child suddenly speaks about sexual behavior or genitals, using language that he never had before, that's a pretty bad sign. Another is if a child suddenly develops psychosomatic headaches or stomach aches that have no physical basis.
What are we doing currently to empower young people, or anyone for that matter, to come forward and to tell?
Reporting is actually improving in this country, and we should celebrate that. The bad news is, still the vast majority of the victims don't tell anybody. The single most important thing that we can do is simply communicate to our kids and tell them, if someone touches you, if someone approaches you, if someone makes you feel uncomfortable in any way, you can come to me and tell me, and I'll help. And then we as adults have to discipline ourselves to really listen.
Right now, if you had a child come to you and say, Uncle Joe abused me, we normally would say, he's a wonderful guy. Are you serious? And what we know now scientifically is at that moment the child backs off.
Joel says he didn't tell his parents about the abuse until he was 18 and had left the Hasidic community.
It was very difficult, especially since we don't talk about sex.
People who are abused in a religious community often run into a problem that's common. It becomes more important to save that institution than to save the victim.
Nobody goes to the authorities because going to the outside authorities is seen as one of the gravest sins, and the idea is to keep everything within the community.
When Joel got involved in trying to raise awareness about sex abuse in the community, he says he discovered other students who claimed the same man had abused them.
What did you do?
My family was very supportive. We thought the best way would be to confront him personally. Within a matter of hours, the whole school was involved, and they promised me that he would be out of the school and he would be permanently taken away from children.
And then something happened. What happened?
2 months later, I turned 23, which is when they immediately took him back to his position.
And what was the significance that you turned 23?
That is when the statute of limitations kicks in. And at that point, I had no legal recourse. I couldn't get anyone to recognize that this person is dangerous and what had happened to me.
Joel did sue the school and the case was dismissed. When we called the lawyer for the man Joel identified as his abuser, he denied the charges, and the school refused to comment.
And will he ever go to jail?
Well, I hope that eventually a child will find the courage in a community to be able to come forward.
Would that be justice for you?
Knowing that he's away from children, that would do a lot for my sense of justice and just sense of self.
The children who experience abuse are much more likely to engage in antisocial behaviors. I believe 58% more likely to be arrested as juvenile perpetrators, and also much more likely to be arrested as adults.
A new treatment was recently tested at Yale and at the Brooklyn Child Advocacy Center.
CFTSI stands for the Child and Family Traumatic Stress Intervention. It's a brief 4 to 6 session intervention that's designed to help a caregiver and a child who's experienced abuse communicate about their abuse. The thing that's really the most exciting about this intervention is that there was a 54% reduction in symptom, and there was a 73% less likelihood that they could be diagnosed for post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD.
And so early intervention, extremely important?
Post-traumatic stress disorder, we associate it with returning military, but the reality is this is a common occurrence that impacts the lives of child sexual abuse victims. These kids do not tell. They don't tell anybody, and they suffer in silence, and we as a society need to recognize these indicators early and intervene while there's still the greatest potential to change the future paths of these kids' lives.
We encourage you to speak out. You have the power. If you'd like to report an abuse case, please call the National Center at 1-800-THE-LOST. And for more information on resources, visit us at 7online.com/protect. I'm Diana Williams. Thanks for joining us.